There comes a moment in every life when something inside you begins to change so quietly that almost no one notices. You still wake up. You still answer messages. You still go to work. You still smile when people expect you to smile. From the outside, nothing seems different. But inside, something has shifted. You begin to feel tired in a way that sleep cannot fix. Not physically tired. Psychologically tired. Tired of adjusting yourself. Tired of reading the room before you speak. Tired of measuring your worth through the reactions of people who do not truly know you. Tired of carrying an invisible burden that nobody else can see. And perhaps the most painful part is this. You cannot explain why. Because your life may appear perfectly normal. Maybe you have responsibilities. Maybe you have achievements. Maybe people even admire you. Yet beneath the surface, there's a quiet emptiness. A feeling that somewhere along the way, you stopped living your life and started performing it. Carl Jung believed that one of the greatest psychological dangers is not failure. It is losing contact with your own center, not in a dramatic moment, but gradually. So gradually that you hardly notice it happening. A little more conformity, a little more self-censorship, a little more dependence on approval, until one day you wake up and realize you no longer know who you are when nobody is watching. And that realization can be terrifying because the world teaches you how to fit in, but it rarely teaches you how to belong to yourself. Tonight, we are going to explore one of Jung's most powerful insights. Why focusing on yourself is not selfish. Why the need for approval quietly drains your life force. Why comparison destroys individuality. And why the path back to yourself begins the moment you stop living through the eyes of others. Because what if the freedom you've been searching for has nothing to do with changing the world around you? What if it begins the moment you stop asking the world who you are? Stay with me, because by the end of this journey, you may discover that the person you've been trying so hard to become was never lost, only buried beneath years of expectations. Most people believe they are making their own decisions. But if we look closely, many of our choices are not truly our own. The career we pursued, the image we maintain, the opinions we repeat, the goals we chase, the version of ourselves we present to the world, how much of it was genuinely chosen, and how much of it was quietly inherited from the expectations of others. From childhood, we learn a powerful lesson. Approval feels safe. When we are praised, we feel accepted. When we are criticized, we feel threatened. Gradually, the mind begins to associate approval with survival, and without realizing it, we spend years constructing our identity around that need. We learn what gets rewarded, what gets attention, what gets admiration, and slowly, we become experts at adaptation. But adaptation comes with a hidden cost. The more attention you give to how others see you, the less attention you give to how you actually feel. This is where many people become trapped, not by other people, but by their dependence on other people's reactions. Every compliment becomes emotional fuel. Every criticism becomes emotional poison. Every silence becomes a source of anxiety. And life turns into a constant search for external confirmation. Carl Jung saw this as one of the earliest signs of psychological alienation, because when your value depends on the world around you, your center no longer belongs to you. It belongs to the crowd. And the crowd is always changing, which means your sense of self is always unstable, always vulnerable, always searching. And this is where the journey back to yourself truly begins. If your life has been shaped by the need for approval, a difficult question naturally follows. Who exactly has been living your life? Because if every decision is filtered through acceptance, if every choice is influenced by how it will be perceived, then who is actually making those choices? According to Carl Jung, there is a psychological structure that quietly takes control when we become too dependent on the opinions of others. He called it the persona. The persona is not your true self. It is your social mask, the version of you that knows how to fit in, the version that understands what to say, how to behave, how to avoid rejection, how to earn approval. And at first, this mask is not a problem. In fact, it is necessary. Every human being develops a persona. Without it, social life will be impossible. We all learn that certain behaviors are rewarded, certain emotions are welcomed, Certain qualities are admired, and certain parts of ourselves should remain hidden. This adaptation helps us survive. It helps us belong. It helps us navigate the world. But Jung warned that something dangerous happens when a person forgets that the persona is only a mask, because what begins as adaptation can slowly become identity. And when that happens, you stop asking, "Who am I?" and start asking, "What version of me will be accepted?" This shift is subtle, almost invisible, but it changes everything. The agreeable child learns that expressing anger creates conflict, so they become nice. The sensitive child learns that vulnerability invites criticism, so they become strong. The creative child learns that imagination is not practical, so they become responsible. The spiritual person learns that doubt is frowned upon, so they pretend to have certainty. Little by little, pieces of the authentic self are sacrificed, not because they are bad, but because they do not fit the image that receives approval. And each sacrifice seems small, almost insignificant, until years later, you find yourself living a life that looks successful from the outside, yet feels strangely empty on the inside, because the life being lived is not fully yours. It belongs to the mask. Jung once wrote, "The persona is that which in reality one is not, but which oneself as well as others think one is." Read that again. Most people spend years trying to perfect an identity that is not even their true identity. They become experts at appearing confident, appearing successful, appearing happy, appearing spiritual, appearing strong. But appearance is not authenticity, and the soul always knows the difference. This is why so many people feel exhausted, not because life is difficult, but because performance is exhausting. Imagine being an actor on stage every hour of every day, always saying the correct thing, always controlling your reactions, always maintaining an image. Eventually, the performance consumes enormous energy, and yet most people never realize what is draining them. They believe they are tired because of work, because of stress, because of responsibilities. But often they are exhausted because they are carrying a version of themselves that was never meant to be carried forever. The mask has become heavier than the person beneath it, and the longer this continues, the further you drift from your center. You begin to lose contact with your instincts, your intuition, your desires, your truth, until one day a strange feeling appears. A feeling many people experience but struggle to describe. You are alone. No one is watching. No one is judging. No one expects anything from you. And yet, you still do not know what you want. You still do not know what you truly feel. You still do not know who you are without a role to play. This is one of the most important moments in Jungian psychology, because it reveals a painful reality. The persona has become stronger than the self. And when that happens, life starts revolving around image rather than meaning. You no longer live from your center. You live from your reflection. And no reflection can ever satisfy the soul, because the soul is not asking for admiration. The soul is asking for truth. The soul wants something deeper, something persona can never provide. And that is exactly where the next stage of the journey begins. Because everything that the persona rejects, everything that did not fit the mask, everything that was hidden in order to be accepted, does not disappear. It waits, in silence, in darkness, deep within the unconscious. And Jung gave a name to that hidden territory, the shadow. If the persona is the mask you show to the world, then what happens to everything that does not fit the mask? What happens to the anger you were told was unacceptable, the fear you were told to hide, the desires you learned to suppress, the dreams that seem too dangerous, the emotions that threaten your image? Most people assume these parts simply disappear. But Jung believed the opposite. Nothing disappears. Everything that is rejected by consciousness remains alive within the unconscious, waiting, observing, gathering energy. Jung called this hidden realm the shadow. And contrary to popular belief, the shadow is not evil. It is not a monster hiding inside you. It is simply everything you have refused to acknowledge, everything you learned to push away in order to become acceptable. The shadow contains your pain, but it also contains your power. It contains your fears, but it also contains your potential. It contains the parts of yourself that never had permission to exist. And this is why the journey inward becomes so uncomfortable. Because sooner or later, you must face what you spent years avoiding. The person who appears endlessly kind may discover enormous resentment buried beneath the surface. The person who appears fearless may discover deep insecurity. The person who appears spiritually awakened may discover wounds they never truly healed. The person who appears strong may discover a desperate longing to be held and understood. And this realization can be shocking, because the ego wants to believe it knows itself. But Jung understood something profound. Most people know only the version of themselves that survived, not the whole person, not the complete person, not the authentic person, only the version that adapted. This is why life often creates crises. A failed relationship, a betrayal, a loss, a burnout, an unexpected collapse. These moments feel painful, but from a Jungian perspective, they often serve a deeper purpose. They expose what has been hidden, because the shadow cannot remain buried forever. Eventually, it demands attention, not to punish you, but to restore balance. Imagine trying to hold a beach ball underwater. For a few moments, it works, but the deeper you push it down, the more forcefully it tries to rise. The shadow behaves in exactly the same way. The more aggressively you suppress something, the more energy it accumulates beneath consciousness. And eventually that energy emerges, sometimes as anxiety, sometimes as depression, sometimes as rage, sometimes as self-sabotage, sometimes as a feeling that your life no longer makes sense. The tragedy is that many people misinterpret these experiences. They think something is wrong with them, when in reality, something inside them is trying to be heard. Jung once said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." Think about that carefully. Most people spend their lives trying to become better, but very few are willing to become whole. Becoming better is comfortable. Becoming whole is terrifying, because wholeness requires confronting everything you have rejected, everything you have denied, everything you wish wasn't there. And yet, this confrontation is the doorway to freedom, because what you acknowledge no longer controls you. What you face no longer needs to hide. What you integrate no longer needs to sabotage your life from the shadows. A person who accepts their anger becomes less controlled by it. A person who accepts their fear becomes more courageous. A person who accepts their imperfections becomes more authentic. This is a paradox. The parts of yourself you fear most often contain the very energy needed for transformation. And perhaps that is why so many people feel exhausted. Not because they are carrying too much, but because they are carrying too little themselves. Entire dimensions of their being have been locked away. Creativity, passion, truth, instinct, power, love, grief, desire, all waiting behind the walls of the shadow, waiting to be reclaimed. And when this process begins, something extraordinary happens. You stop trying to become someone else. You stop chasing an ideal image. You stop fighting yourself. And for the first time, you begin the process Jung called individuation. The journey of becoming who you truly are, not who society wants you to be, not who your family expects you to be, not who your fears tell you to be, but who you were meant to become. And that journey requires another sacrifice, perhaps the hardest sacrifice of all, the willingness to stop comparing your path to everyone else's. The moment you begin comparing your life to someone else's, you begin abandoning your own path. And in today's world, comparison has become almost impossible to avoid. Every day, we are exposed to carefully edited lives, images of success, images of happiness, images of wealth, images of relationships, images of achievement, a constant stream of evidence that everyone else seems to be moving faster, achieving more, living better, becoming more. And whether we realize it or not, something begins happening inside us. We stop looking inward and start looking sideways. We begin measuring our lives against people whose journeys were never meant to be ours. Carl Jung understood this long before social media existed, because comparison is not a technological problem. It is a psychological one. The moment you compare yourself to another person, you unconsciously assume that both of you are meant to follow the same blueprint. But Jung's entire philosophy points in the opposite direction. Every individual possesses a unique psychological structure, a unique destiny, a unique calling, a unique path toward wholeness. The tragedy is that most people never discover this path because they spend their lives trying to walk someone else's. Imagine an oak tree looking at a rose. The oak sees beauty, color, admiration, attention, and suddenly it wishes it were a rose. Meanwhile, the rose looks at the oak, its strength, its size, its stability, and wishes it were a tree. Neither realizes the absurdity of the comparison, because each carries a different purpose, a different nature, a different destiny. Human beings make this mistake every day. The artist compares themselves to the entrepreneur. The entrepreneur compares themselves to the athlete. The athlete compares themselves to the philosopher. The philosopher compares themselves to the celebrity. And everyone feels inadequate, not because they are failing, but because they are measuring themselves against a life they were never designed to live. Jung called the journey toward one's unique destiny individuation. And individuation demands something radical. It demands that you stop asking, "How do I become like them?" and start asking, "Who am I meant to become?" Those two questions lead to entirely different lives. The first creates imitation. The second creates transformation. The first creates anxiety. The second creates meaning. The first keeps you trapped in comparison. The second leads you toward yourself. This is why comparison creates such deep suffering, because every comparison contains a hidden rejection, a rejection of your own unfolding, a rejection of your own timing, a rejection of your own process. And life cannot be lived authentically while you are constantly rejecting where you are. The soul does not bloom on a schedule. It unfolds in seasons. Some seasons are for growth. Some seasons are for loss. Some seasons are for confusion. Some seasons are for rebuilding. And yet, modern culture treats every season as if it should look like success, as if every moment should be productive, visible, impressive. But nature does not work that way, and neither does the human psyche. There are periods when nothing appears to be happening, periods when progress seems invisible, periods when your life feels uncertain, meaningless, directionless. Yet beneath the surface, profound transformation may be occurring, just as a seed grows underground long before anyone sees a tree. Most people abandon themselves during these seasons because they look at others and conclude, "I am behind." But behind whom? According to whose timeline? According to whose destiny? Jung would argue that this question itself reveals the illusion, because your life was never meant to be measured against another person's journey. The moment you compare paths, you lose sight of your own. And nowhere is this more destructive than in the pursuit of approval. Many people do not truly want what they are chasing. They want the recognition attached to it. They want the admiration, the status, the validation, the feeling of being seen. But validation is a poor substitute for meaning. You can achieve everything the world celebrates and still feel empty. You can gain recognition and still feel lost. You can receive applause and still feel disconnected from yourself, because meaning comes from alignment, not approval. Meaning emerges when your outer life reflects your inner truth, and that kind of life requires courage, because once you stop comparing yourself to others, you begin hearing a different voice, a quieter voice, a deeper voice, a voice that has been waiting beneath the noise all along. At first, it can feel uncomfortable, because that voice does not speak the language of popularity. It does not care about trends. It does not care about status. It does not care about what everyone else is doing. It asks only one question: what is true for you? And answering that question often requires something most people fear: solitude, not loneliness, not isolation, but conscious solitude, the willingness to step away from the crowd long enough to hear your own soul. Because the deeper truth is this: you cannot discover who you are while constantly listening to who everyone else thinks you should be. And that is why every journey back to the self eventually passes through a place most people spend their entire lives avoiding: silence, aloneness, stillness, the sacred space where the masks begin to fall away, and where, for the first time, you meet yourself. For many people, the idea of being alone feels uncomfortable, not because they dislike themselves, but because they have spent so little time truly meeting themselves. The modern world offers endless distractions: noise, entertainment, notifications, conversations, opinions, endless opportunities to avoid silence. And yet, Jung believed that silence was not merely helpful, it was essential, because there are truths about yourself that cannot be discovered in the crowd. There are questions that cannot be answered by other people. There are parts of your soul that only reveal themselves in solitude. But most people confuse solitude with loneliness. They are not the same. Loneliness is the pain of feeling disconnected. Solitude is the freedom of reconnecting. Loneliness says, I am abandoned. Solitude says, I am finally listening. The difference is profound. One drains you, the other restores you. Yet, many people avoid solitude because the moment external noise disappears, internal noise becomes louder. The unfinished grief emerges. The unanswered questions arise. The fears become visible. The doubts step forward. And suddenly there is nowhere left to run. This is why so many people stay busy. Not because they are passionate. Not because they are productive. But because stillness feels threatening. Movement becomes a form of escape. Busyness becomes a form of avoidance. Constant stimulation becomes a shield against self-confrontation. But Jung understood something most people never realize. What you avoid internally eventually controls you externally. The fears you refuse to face begin making decisions for you. The wounds you refuse to acknowledge begin shaping your relationships. The insecurities you refuse to examine begin directing your behavior. And the life you build slowly becomes organized around avoidance rather than truth. That is why solitude is so important. Because solitude interrupts the pattern. It removes the distractions. It removes the performance. It removes the audience. And when the audience disappears, something remarkable happens. The persona begins to weaken. For perhaps the first time in years, you are no longer trying to impress anyone. No longer trying to explain yourself. No longer trying to prove your worth. No longer trying to maintain an image. You are simply present. And in that presence, another voice begins to emerge. A quieter voice. A deeper voice. The voice beneath conditioning. The voice beneath fear. The voice beneath expectation. The voice Jung believed belonged to the deeper self. At first, this voice can feel unfamiliar, because it does not sound like society. It does not sound like your critics. It does not sound like your fears. It speaks from somewhere deeper, and often, it tells you things you have spent years avoiding. It may reveal that you have outgrown certain relationships. It may reveal that your current path is not aligned with your soul. It may reveal that some of your ambitions were never truly yours. It may reveal that much of your suffering comes from living against your own nature. These realizations can feel unsettling, because awakening is rarely comfortable. Most people imagine transformation as gaining something new, but often transformation begins with letting something go. A false identity, a borrowed dream, an outdated belief, a role you have carried for too long. And letting go can feel like a kind of death, not physical death, psychological death, the death of who you thought you were. Jung frequently described transformation in terms of symbolic death and rebirth, because before something authentic can emerge, something artificial must dissolve. Before the true self can appear, the false self must lose its power. This process requires courage, not the courage to fight the world, but the courage to sit quietly with yourself, to face your fears without distraction, to face uncertainty without escaping, to face your own soul without looking away. And this is why so few people complete the journey, because walking your own path often means walking alone for a while, not forever, but long enough to discover who you are without the influence of the crowd, long enough to separate your voice from the voices around you, long enough to stop seeking permission, long enough to remember what your soul has been trying to tell you all along. There comes a point in this journey when something begins to change. The opinions of others lose their grip. The need for validation weakens. The pressure to perform starts fading. And for the first time, you begin to experience a quiet inner stability, not because life has become easier, but because you are finally standing on your own foundation. And that foundation leads to the most important discovery of all, the discovery of the self, not the persona, not the shadow, not the identity created by society, but the deeper center of your being, the center Jung believed every human soul is searching for. And once you begin finding that center, everything changes. There's a moment in every genuine transformation when a person begins to realize something extraordinary. The life they were trying so desperately to build was never the life they truly wanted. The approval they chased never brought lasting peace. The image they protected never satisfied the deeper hunger inside them. And slowly, a new question emerges. If I am not the mask, and I am not my fears, then who am I? This question stands at the center of Jung's psychology. Not what do I do? Not how successful am I? Not what do people think of me? But who am I beneath all of this? Jung believed that hidden beneath the layers of conditioning, expectation, fear, and adaptation exists something far deeper, something he called the self. The self is not the ego. The ego is a part of you that says, "This is who I think I am." The self is something larger, something wiser, something deeper. It is the totality of your being, the center around which your entire psychological life is organized. And whether you realize it or not, your soul is constantly trying to guide you toward it. This is why certain experiences feel meaningful, why some paths feel alive, why some decisions create peace, why some opportunities feel strangely wrong even when they appear perfect. The self communicates through intuition, through dreams, through symbols, through deep inner knowing. Yet most people never learn to hear it, because the voice of the self is quiet, and the world is loud. The world tells you what to pursue. The self asks what matters. The world tells you who to impress. The self asks who you are becoming. The world teaches competition. The self teaches alignment. The world rewards conformity. The self calls for authenticity. And this creates an inevitable conflict, a conflict between who you are expected to be and who you are meant to become. Jung called the resolution of this conflict individuation, the process of becoming whole, not perfect, whole. There is an important difference. Perfection is an illusion. Wholeness is reality. Perfection demands that you remove your flaws. Wholeness asks you to integrate them. Perfection creates pressure. Wholeness creates freedom. Perfection is performance. Wholeness is truth. This is why individuation is not about becoming better than other people. It is about becoming more fully yourself. The journey requires integrating the persona, integrating the shadow, accepting your strengths, accepting your weaknesses, accepting your light, accepting your darkness, not choosing one over the other, but embracing both, because a complete human being contains opposites, strength and vulnerability, confidence and uncertainty, courage and fear, wisdom and imperfection. The mature soul no longer tries to eliminate these contradictions. It learns to hold them. And something remarkable happens when this integration begins. The need for approval starts fading, not because people stop judging you, but because their judgment no longer determines your value. The need to prove yourself starts dissolving, not because you have become superior, but because you have become rooted in something deeper than opinion, rooted in something deeper than success, rooted in something deeper than image. For the first time, your life begins moving from the inside out rather than the outside in, and that changes everything. You stop asking, "What will people think?" and begin asking, "What is true?" You stop asking, "What is safest?" and begin asking, "What is authentic?" You stop asking, "How can I fit in?" and begin asking, "What is my path?" This shift may seem small, but it is one of the most powerful transformations a human being can experience. Because every great life begins the moment a person stops betraying themselves, the moment they stop abandoning their own truth, the moment they stop negotiating their soul for acceptance. And while this path is not always easy, it is infinitely more meaningful, because every step brings you closer to your center, closer to your purpose, closer to your truth, closer to the person you were always meant to become. And once you begin living from that place, you discover something most people spend their entire lives searching for: inner freedom. not freedom from problems, not freedom from uncertainty, not freedom from criticism, but freedom from a need to become someone else. Freedom to be exactly who you are. And that freedom changes the way you move through the world. It changes the way you love, the way you work, the way you dream, the way you live. Because now your life is no longer being directed by fear. It is being guided by something far greater, your deepest self. And when that happens, a new chapter begins. One in which your energy is no longer scattered across countless expectations. One in which your attention finally returns to where it belongs. To your own life, to your own path, to your own soul. And that is why the final lesson may be the most important of all. You must learn how to withdraw your energy from a world that constantly demands it. One of the greatest misunderstandings about personal growth is the belief that transformation comes from adding more knowledge, more achievements, more validation, more success, more recognition. But there comes a point on the journey where growth requires the opposite, not addition, subtraction, the removal of everything that constantly pulls you away from yourself. Because every day, whether you realize it or not, your energy is being claimed by expectations, by obligations, by opinions, by endless demand for your attention. The modern world is built around distraction. Everyone wants something from you. Your time, your focus, your approval, your reaction, your emotional energy. And if you are not careful, you can spend your entire life responding to everyone else while neglecting yourself. Jung understood that psychological energy is precious. Where your attention goes, your life follows. And this raises an uncomfortable question. How much of your energy truly belongs to you? How much of it is spent worrying about what others think? How much is spent replaying conversations, defending yourself against criticism, seeking validation, trying to convince people to understand you, trying to prove your worth, trying to gain acceptance? Most people never realize how exhausting this becomes. Not because the tasks themselves are difficult, but because the mind is constantly working, constantly calculating, constantly seeking approval, constantly monitoring perception, and this invisible effort drains the soul. Imagine carrying a bucket filled with water. Now imagine that bucket has dozens of tiny holes. No matter how much water you pour into it, it never stays full. That is what happens when your energy constantly leaks into the opinions of others. No achievement is enough. No praise is enough. No amount of recognition feels lasting because the source of fulfillment remains external. And what comes from the outside can always be taken away. This is why one of the most powerful decisions you can make is to stop feeding every opinion. Not every criticism deserves your attention. Not every misunderstanding requires explanation. Not every judgment requires defense. Not every person deserves access to your inner world. There is wisdom in knowing when to speak, but there is also wisdom in knowing when to remain silent. As you mature psychologically, something begins to change. You stop feeling responsible for everyone's perception of you. You stop trying to manage how others interpret your choices. You stop explaining your path to people committed to misunderstanding it. And with each boundary you establish, energy returns, clarity returns, peace returns, because your attention is no longer scattered. It is centered. This does not mean becoming cold. It does not mean becoming selfish. It does not mean rejecting the world. It means understanding a profound truth. You cannot give what you do not possess. A person disconnected from themselves cannot genuinely help others. A person consumed by external approval cannot lead. A person who constantly abandons their own truth cannot experience lasting peace. Real contribution begins with inner alignment, and inner alignment requires protecting your energy, protecting your attention, protecting your relationship with yourself. There comes a stage in life when you realize something liberating. Not everyone will understand you, and they do not have to. Not everyone will agree with you, and they do not have to. Not everyone will approve of your choices, and they do not have to, because your purpose is not to be understood by everyone. Your purpose is to be truthful with yourself. The moment you understand this, a tremendous weight begins to lift. You stop performing. You stop proving. You stop chasing. You stop negotiating your identity. And for the first time, you begin living, not according to expectations, not according to fear, not according to approval, but according to your deepest knowing. And perhaps that is what true freedom has always been, the courage to belong to yourself, even when others do not understand, even when others disagree, even when you must walk a different road. Because a person who stands firmly in their own truth possesses something the world cannot give and cannot take away, an inner center, a quiet strength, a deep and unshakable peace. And once that center is found, everything changes. Perhaps the greatest tragedy is not that people lose themselves. It is that many never realize it happened. They spend years becoming what others expect, years performing, years adapting, years chasing approval, without ever asking the question that matters most. Who am I beneath all of this? Carl Jung believed that the purpose of life was not perfection, not popularity, not status, not approval, but individuation. The lifelong journey of becoming who you truly are, the journey of removing the masks, facing the shadow, walking through solitude, listening to the self, and returning to the center of your own being. Because the truth is this: the world will always have opinions. People will always judge. Expectations will never disappear. There will always be another standard, another comparison, another image to chase. But none of those things can tell you who you are. Only you can discover that. And the moment you stop searching for yourself in the eyes of others, you begin finding yourself within. Maybe that is why the path feels so difficult, because it asks you to release everything false, everything borrowed, everything performed, everything that is not truly yours. But on the other side of that release, something extraordinary awaits. A life that belongs to you, a mind no longer imprisoned by approval, a heart no longer dependent on validation, a soul no longer hiding behind a mask. And perhaps years from now, when you look back on your life, you will realize that the moment everything changed was not when the world finally accepted you. It was when you finally accepted yourself, when you stopped asking for permission, stopped asking for approval, stopped asking who you should become, and finally remembered who you were. Because the person you have been searching for, the peace you have been searching for, the freedom you have been searching for, was never somewhere out there. It has been waiting inside you all along, quietly, patiently, beneath the noise, beneath the masks, beneath the fear, waiting for you to come home. And that journey begins the moment you choose to focus on yourself and forget about everyone else. Perhaps the greatest illusion you have ever believed is that you need permission to become yourself. Permission from your family, permission from society, permission from your past, permission from people who never had to live your life. But the truth is, no one can grant you what already belongs to you. Your authenticity does not need approval. Your purpose does not need validation. Your soul does not need consensus. The oak tree does not ask the forest for permission to grow. The river does not ask the mountain for permission to flow. The sun does not ask the sky for permission to shine. They simply become what they are. And perhaps that is what life has been trying to teach you all along. Not how to become more, but how to stop being less. Less than your truth, less than your potential, less than your authentic self. For years, maybe decades, you may have carried identities that were never truly yours. Roles, expectations, masks, stories, labels. Yet beneath every role, there's always been something untouched by failure, untouched by rejection, untouched by criticism, untouched by comparison, a deeper presence, a deeper intelligence, a deeper self. And that self has been patiently waiting through every disappointment, every heartbreak, every mistake, every season of confusion, not judging, not condemning, only waiting for the moment you finally turned inward, because the self does not force. It invites, it whispers, it guides. And when you finally listen, life begins to feel different, not easier, but more meaningful, not perfect, but more authentic, not certain, but more aligned. You stop trying to control every outcome. You stop trying to satisfy every expectation. You stop trying to become someone else's version of success. And instead, you begin the sacred work of becoming yourself. So if there is one thing to remember from this entire journey, remember this. You were not born to spend your life performing. You were not born to become a reflection of other people's expectations. You were not born to abandon your soul in exchange for approval. You were born to discover who you truly are, and that discovery is worth every risk, every moment of solitude, every uncomfortable truth, every step into the unknown, because at the end of the journey, the greatest achievement is not wealth, not status, not recognition. It is being able to look at your own life and say, this is mine. This is the life I chose. This is the person I became. And for perhaps the first time, that is enough